This story delves into themes of extreme isolation, psychological distress, and the unsettling nature of reality. Listener discretion is advised. It was a Tuesday. Not just any Tuesday, but the Tuesday that swallowed time whole, leaving me stranded in a moment that would never end for anyone else. The last thing I remember clearly before everything changed was the relentless hum of my car engine, stuck in rush hour traffic on I-5 North, the usual morning symphony of blaring horns, distant sirens, and the tinny pop of my radio playing a forgotten 90s hit. Then a flicker. A strange, almost imperceptible waver in the air, like heat haze on a scorching summer road. But it was a crisp, clear autumn morning in late October. And then silence. Not the kind of silence you get when you turn off the radio. This was a silence so profound it felt like a physical force, pressing in on my eardrums, stealing the very breath from the air. My car, a beat-up Civic, had simply stopped. But it wasn't just my car. I instinctively slammed on the brakes, though there was no need. The SUV directly in front of me, a gleaming black behemoth, was frozen in place. Its driver, a woman with a phone pressed to her ear, was perfectly still, a single strand of hair caught in the breeze that no longer existed, suspended just inches from her face. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, absolute stillness. I tried to speak, to yell, but my throat felt constricted. "Hello." I managed, the word feeling impossibly loud in the vacuum. Nothing. Not even an echo. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The pickup truck behind me, its driver mid-yawn, was as motionless as a statue. A construction worker on the side of the road, mid-swing with a sledgehammer, was locked in an eternal pose against the rising sun. Every single person, every single movement had ceased. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up my throat. This wasn't a power outage. This wasn't a traffic jam. This was impossible. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my hands shaking so violently, I almost couldn't release the buckle. My legs felt like lead as I pushed open the car door. The familiar groan of the hinges sounded alien, a jarring intrusion into the suffocating quiet. Stepping out onto the asphalt of the freeway, I expected the rush of wind, the smell of exhaust, the distant roar of planes overhead. Instead, there was nothing. The air was perfectly still, devoid of scent, of sound, of life. Dust motes, caught in the sliver of sunlight piercing through the overpass, hung suspended like tiny, glittering constellations. A plastic grocery bag, abandoned on the shoulder, was frozen mid-flutter, a ghost of motion. I walked towards the SUV in front of me, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The woman inside, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open, was a perfect tableau of a phone conversation. Her breath, a tiny wisp, seemed to be frozen in the air just before her lips. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers brushing against the cold glass of her window. No reaction. Of course not. She was gone. Or rather, the world had stopped for her. But not for me. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. It was a pathetic sound, lost in the vast expanse of the frozen highway. I walked around to her driver's side door, tried the handle. Locked. I peered closer at her face. Her expression was one of mild irritation, typical of a busy morning call. It was a mundane moment, immortalized in an instant. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A dream? A hallucination? I pinched myself hard. The sharp sting in my arm was undeniably real. A stroke? A brain tumor? I felt perfectly fine, if not utterly terrified. Was I dead? Was this some kind of purgatory? But if I was dead, why was I still moving, breathing, thinking? Why was I the only one? I started walking faster now, a desperate energy coursing through me. I passed car after car, each a silent monument to a moment interrupted. A man shaving with an electric razor, a woman applying lipstick, a child with a juice box halfway to their mouth. Their faces, their clothes, the contents of their cars, all perfectly preserved. It was like walking through a museum of humanity, except the exhibits were real, and I was the only visitor. The highway stretched out, an endless ribbon of concrete, studded with these frozen moments. I could see the city skyline in the distance, usually a hazy tapestry of movement and light. Now it was a perfectly rendered photograph. No smoke rising from chimneys, no subtle sway of trees, no glinting sunlight moving across glass facades. Everything was absolutely terrifyingly still. I veered off the highway at the next exit, seeking something, anything that might offer a clue. The off-ramp was equally deserted, equally frozen. A delivery truck, its tires squealing in an eternal drift, was stuck mid-turn. A dog walker leash taut stood frozen as their golden retriever, tongue lolling, seemed about to lunge at an invisible squirrel. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a localized event. This was everywhere. I found myself on a familiar street, lined with small businesses and residential homes. The local coffee shop, the daily grind, was a beacon of normal, now an eerie diorama. Through the window, I could see people mid-sip, mid-conversation. A barista mid-fomart. The smell of roasted coffee beans, usually so inviting, was conspicuously absent. All smells, all sounds, all sensations beyond my own movements had vanished. I pushed open the door to the coffee shop. The little bell above the door, usually jingling cheerfully, made no sound. It was frozen in place too, its tiny clapper suspended inches from the brass. The air inside was cool, stagnant. I walked past tables where people sat, their faces a mixture of concern, boredom, or joy. A young couple, their hands clasped across a table, were locked in an intimate gaze. I almost felt like an intruder, an uninvited ghost in their perfectly preserved moment. I walked behind the counter, my eyes scanning the frozen scene. The espresso machine, usually hissing and clanking, was silent. A half-filled coffee cup sat beneath a spigot, a single drop of dark liquid frozen in midair, a perfect sphere of impending gravity. It was beautiful in a horrifying way. My gaze fell on the barista. His name was Kevin, a friendly guy who always remembered my order. He stood with a pitcher of milk in one hand, poised over a latte, a look of focused concentration on his face. I reached out, hesitantly, and touched his arm. His skin was cold like marble but not frozen solid. Just still. Unresponsive. No pulse, no warmth. Just a human form perfectly preserved. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a temporary glitch. This was real. And I was completely, utterly alone. The sheer weight of that realization crushed me. Billions of people all around the world, reduced to motionless figures, silent witnesses to a reality they no longer inhabited. And me. Why me? I stumbled back outside, needing air, needing to escape the silent judgment of Kevin's frozen face. The sun was still in the same spot in the sky. It hadn't moved. The shadows hadn't shifted. Time, as I understood it, had ceased to exist for everything but me. The initial terror began to give way to a chilling sense of emptiness. What was I supposed to do? Call for help? There was no one to call. Go home? To what? A house where my family would be frozen just like everyone else? The very thought sent a fresh wave of despair through me. I looked around at the silent street, the frozen cars, the houses with their neatly manicured lawns, the trees with their leaves rigidly held in place. This was my world now. A world without consequence, without interaction, without sound. A world where I was the last flickering ember in a universe of stone. My mind, desperate for a plan, any plan, latched onto a single terrifying question. Was I truly the only one? Was there anyone else out there, moving through this silent, frozen apocalypse? And if so, how would I ever find them? The vastness of the world, combined with the impossible stillness, suddenly felt like an unconquerable enemy. I had to know. I had to try. My first step, I decided, had to be to find out exactly how far this chilling phenomenon extended. I needed answers, and I needed to start looking for them. Right now. My hands trembled as I pushed open the front door. The air outside was crisp, the morning sun casting long, unmoving shadows. My neighbor Sarah was frozen mid-stride, her hand reaching for her mailbox, a small red envelope clutched between her fingers. Her golden retriever Max was poised on the lawn mid-bark, a silent snarl etched onto his face, a toy tennis ball suspended inches from his open slobbery jaws. It was a tableau of suburban life, perfectly preserved yet utterly dead. I walked past them, my footsteps the only sound in a world that had become a gigantic, meticulously crafted diorama. The birds in the trees were frozen in flight, their wings spread, feathers caught in an invisible, unyielding amber. A faint wisp of smoke hung motionless above a chimney down the street, a permanent testament to a fire that had been burning moments before the world stopped. Everything was so vivid, so real, yet so terrifyingly artificial. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming silence. I had to resist the urge to shout, to scream, to somehow break this suffocating stillness. It felt like if I made too much noise, the fragile illusion might shatter, or worse, I might realize this was all some elaborate, cruel trick of my own mind. I pinched myself hard, feeling the sharp sting, confirming I was undeniably awake, undeniably present. I headed towards Main Street, a familiar route I'd walked 1,000 times. Every detail was amplified, every frozen face a new shock. A mailman, Michael, was poised next to his truck, a stack of letters in his hand, his expression one of mild concentration. A young mother, Jessica, was pushing a stroller, her head turned to look at something I couldn't discern, a faint smile on her lips. The baby in the stroller, a tiny bundle, had its eyes wide open, staring up at its mother, a silent gurgle forever caught in its throat. Each face I passed, whether it was the focused mailman, the smiling mother, or the joyful child, was a stark reminder of the life that had been abruptly snatched away, leaving behind only these perfect, hollow shells. It wasn't just a physical freeze, it was a freeze of consciousness, of time, of existence itself. And I, for some inexplicable reason, was the lone exception, a glitch in the cosmic fabric. The coffee shop on the corner, the Daily Grind, was a frozen hive of activity. David, the barista, was suspended mid-pour, coffee arcing from the pot into a cup. Steam too was frozen, a misty cloud above the espresso machine. Customers sat at tables mid-conversation, mid-sip. A woman had her phone held to her ear, her mouth open as if speaking, her eyes wide with some unheard emotion. It was like a photograph had come to life, but only I had been spared from its capture. I tried to touch a few things. The coffee in David's pot felt solid, like dark, polished stone. The steam, when I reached for it, felt like nothing, my hand passing through it as if it were just an optical illusion, yet it looked real, perfectly still. I nudged a chair at an empty table. It moved with a faint scrape, the sound jarring in the profound silence. It seemed the physical world was still physical, but the processes of the world had ceased. No heat, no movement, no decay. The sheer scale of it began to sink in. This wasn't just my house, my street, my neighborhood. This was the entire town, perhaps the entire world. The thought was a cold, heavy stone in my gut. If it was just me, then what? What did I do? How did I survive? How did I even begin to understand? I needed to go further. My car was parked in my driveway, but the keys were inside on the kitchen counter. Even if I got them, I doubted the car would start. The engine, the battery, the fuel pump, all those complex systems required electricity and mechanics that were likely as frozen as everything else. I tried the door handle of a delivery truck parked outside the coffee shop. It was locked. I checked a few other cars. All locked. It seemed the world's frozen state extended to its security systems too. Walking was my only option, and I had to walk fast. The sun was climbing higher, but its warmth felt distant, almost theoretical. The world was lit but not alive. The air itself felt thin, strangely devoid of the usual hum of life. No distant traffic, no sirens, no rustling leaves, not even the faint buzz of power lines. It was a vacuum, a perfect, terrifying stillness that pressed in on my eardrums, making my own breathing sound impossibly loud, a ragged gasp in the universal quiet. I kept walking, past the town square where a group of children and their parents were frozen mid-laughter around a fountain, water caught in mid-spray, sparkling like diamonds. A young girl, Emily, was reaching out for a balloon that floated inches above her grasp, her face a picture of pure joy. I felt a pang of something akin to grief. These moments, these lives were suspended, perhaps forever. I reached the highway on the edge of town. Here, the scale of the phenomenon became truly terrifying. Cars, trucks, and motorcycles were frozen in various states of motion. A semi-truck was mid-lane change, its driver's head turned, a look of concentration on his face. A bicycle lay on its side, its rider, an elderly man in cycling gear, frozen a few feet away, mid-fall, his hands outstretched. There were hundreds, thousands of vehicles, all perfectly still, creating an impossible silent traffic jam stretching as far as the eye could see in both directions. The highway was a testament to the abruptness of it all. There were no signs of a crash, no panic, just an instantaneous cessation of all movement. People were caught in the most mundane, everyday actions, completely unaware of the cataclysm that had befallen them. It wasn't a slow freeze, not a gradual halt. It was an instant stop, a universal pause button pressed on reality. I walked along the shoulder, my gaze sweeping over the frozen landscape. The sheer number of people, the silent faces, the unblinking eyes, it was overwhelming. Each one was a story, a life, now trapped in an eternal present. I wondered if they could feel anything, If their minds were still active, screaming silently within their frozen bodies. The thought made my skin crawl. I hoped for their sake that they felt nothing, knew nothing. My throat was dry, my legs aching, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know. I needed to see more. Was there a boundary? Did it end somewhere? Was there a place where the world was still moving, where other people were alive, bewildered just like me? The sun was now overhead, beating down, but its warmth felt distant, almost theoretical, failing to penetrate the chilling reality of my situation. The world remained cold, silent, and utterly unresponsive to my desperate plea for answers. I pulled out my phone. Miraculously, it still worked. A tiny beacon of normalcy in a sea of frozen abnormality. The battery was at 87%. No network signal, of course. My calls wouldn't go through and texts wouldn't send. But the time was still ticking on its display. A solitary proof of ongoing time in my personal bubble. 11:37 a.m. The world had frozen sometime around 8 a.m., meaning I had been exploring for over 3 hours of walking through a waking nightmare. The loneliness was a physical weight, pressing down on me, heavy as concrete. I was completely alone. The enormity of that realization hit me with full force, a wave of despair that threatened to drown me. No help, no answers, no one to talk to, no one to share this impossible burden with. Just me and a world full of statues, each one a silent accuser of my solitary existence. My exploration had confirmed one terrifying truth. This wasn't localized. This wasn't a dream. This was real, and it was widespread. The question of how far had been answered with a chilling "as far as I can see," and likely beyond. A new, more urgent question replaced it: why? And how do I undo it? I looked at the endless line of frozen cars on the highway, then back towards the town, a silent monument to a life that no longer existed for anyone but me. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, hard determination, a desperate resolve. I couldn't just wander aimlessly, a solitary ghost in a frozen world. I needed a plan. I needed to understand what had happened, and if there was any way, any hope of reversing it. The scale of the problem was immense, terrifyingly vast, but the stakes were even higher. I was the last living person in a world of ghosts, and that meant I had a responsibility, however terrifying and overwhelming, to find a way back, to find a way to unfreeze what had been frozen. My next move had to be calculated, purposeful, not just a desperate search. I needed to find a place where I could think, where I could access information, where I could begin to piece together the shattered fragments of reality. I needed to find a library or a university, or perhaps even a police station. Somewhere with resources, somewhere with answers, somewhere that had once held the collective knowledge of humanity. That was my only hope. The city stretched before me, a monumental diorama of frozen life. Each building, each car, each person was a testament to the sudden, inexplicable cessation of time. My only hope, the collective knowledge of humanity, felt impossibly distant, yet it was the only beacon in this silent, petrified world. I decided on the public library downtown. It was a grand, imposing structure of stone and glass, a true repository of information, and it was closer than the university campus. The journey was a surreal ballet of avoidance. I weaved between frozen cars, their drivers caught in various states of transit, a woman with her hand on the steering wheel, a man reaching for a dropped phone. A delivery truck was stalled mid-turn, its tires a hair's breadth from the curb, a box of fresh produce tumbling in slow motion towards the asphalt. I saw a young couple, their faces inches apart, locked in an eternal kiss on a park bench. A child, no older than 5, was frozen mid-laugh, reaching for a brightly colored balloon that hung suspended just above his fingertips, its string taut and unmoving. Each scene was a punch to the gut, a stark reminder of the vibrant, bustling life that had been abruptly silenced. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a profound, suffocating void that pressed in on me from all sides. No distant sirens, no hum of traffic, no chirping birds, not even the rustle of leaves in a breeze that no longer blew. My own footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the pavement, the only sound in a world that had forgotten how to make noise. The air itself felt heavy, stagnant, as if the very atoms had paused their dance. The sun, a permanent fixture in the sky, cast long, unchanging shadows, but offered no warmth, no sense of passing time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the library. Its massive oak doors stood slightly ajar, as if someone had just entered or exited when the world collectively held its breath. I pushed the door open further, the ancient wood groaning softly, a sound that reverberated through the vast, empty space within. The interior was a mausoleum of knowledge. Rows upon rows of books stood sentinel, their spines bearing silent witness to the world's sudden halt. A librarian, a woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, was frozen mid-reach for a book on a high shelf, a stepladder leaning precariously beside her. Her expression was one of mild concentration, an everyday moment immortalized. Patrons were scattered throughout the reading rooms, some slumped over open books, others staring blankly at computer screens that glowed with static images. The computers, I quickly realized, were useless. No internet, no power beyond what was captured in that frozen instant. My only hope lay in the physical pages, the tangible knowledge contained within the printed word. I needed to find something, anything that could explain this. My mind raced, trying to categorize the impossible. Was it a scientific phenomenon? A temporal anomaly? A mass hallucination? No, the sheer physicality of it, the cold glass, the unmoving dust motes, the solid ground beneath my feet, proved it was real. I headed towards the science section, a vast labyrinth of shelves filled with everything from astrophysics to zoology. My eyes scanned the endless titles, a desperate search for keywords. Time, space, anomaly, freeze, global unknown event. It was like trying to find a single grain of sand on an endless beach. I pulled out books on quantum mechanics, theoretical physics, cosmology, even ancient myths and legends that spoke of the world stopping or gods intervening. I flipped through pages, my fingers flying over the text, my eyes skimming paragraphs, searching for a phrase, a diagram, an idea that resonated with my impossible reality. Hours blurred into an indistinguishable stretch of frantic searching. The silence of the library pressed down on me, amplifying my growing frustration. Each book I put back felt like a failure, another dead end. My stomach growled, a stark reminder of my own biological clock ticking away, contrasting sharply with the frozen world around me. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, but I couldn't leave without answers. Then, buried deep within a forgotten corner, tucked away on a lower shelf in the unexplained phenomena section, I found it. It wasn't a thick, impressive tome, but a slim, unassuming volume with a faded, almost illegible title, The Chronos Paradox, Fringe Theories of Space-Time Manipulation. It looked old, forgotten, probably self-published or from an obscure academic press. The kind of book a serious scientist would scoff at, but in my current situation, fringe sounded exactly right. I pulled it out, a cloud of dust rising around it. The pages were yellowed, brittle. I opened it carefully, the scent of old paper filling my nostrils. The language was dense, filled with jargon I barely understood. Tachyon fields, event horizons, temporal displacement vectors. It was a dizzying array of concepts, but I pressed on, my desperation driving me. And then I saw it. A diagram, crudely drawn but instantly striking. It depicted a sphere, a central point radiating lines outwards, with smaller, intersecting spheres surrounding it. But it wasn't the diagram itself that arrested my attention, it was the caption beneath it. Hypothetical localized field generator for temporal stasis, Project Chimera. Project Chimera. The name sent a shiver down my spine. It sounded less like a theoretical concept and more like an actual clandestine operation. I devoured the surrounding text. The author, a Dr. Silas Blackwood, described a theoretical device capable of generating a localized field that could, in essence, pause the flow of time within its radius. The text spoke of extreme energy requirements, of unforeseen global consequences if such a field were ever to expand beyond its intended scope, of a universal resonance frequency that, if disrupted, could ripple outwards, affecting all matter. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't some abstract theory anymore. This was a blueprint, a warning. Dr. Silas Blackwood. The name echoed in my mind. The book was dated almost 50 years ago. Had he actually built it? Had someone else used his theories? The idea of a localized field, expanding to engulf the entire planet, was terrifying. Yet it was the only explanation that even remotely fit my impossible reality. The book mentioned a few vague details about Dr. Blackwood's early research, referencing a small, privately funded laboratory in a remote, undisclosed location, somewhere in the American Southwest, known only by its cryptic internal designation, Site Echo. It was hardly a definitive address, but it was more than I had before. It was a lead, a direction, a thread to pull in this tangled tapestry of frozen time. My initial hope of finding an explanation had now morphed into a terrifying realization. I wasn't just looking for an answer, I was looking for the source, for the person or the project that had caused this. And the thought of confronting whatever lay at Site Echo, whatever had the power to stop the world, filled me with a primal dread. But it was the only path forward, the only hope I had of understanding and perhaps of undoing this impossible reality. The thought of confronting whatever lay at Site Echo, whatever had the power to stop the world, filled me with a primal dread. But it was the only path forward, the only hope I had of understanding and perhaps of undoing this impossible reality. I spent the next few hours in a blur of frantic preparation. My apartment, still frozen in the moment I'd left it, offered little utility. I needed supplies for a journey that felt less like an expedition and more like a pilgrimage into the unknown. The city, however, was a vast, silent storehouse. I scavenged what I could from abandoned cars and convenience stores. A sturdy backpack, non-perishable food, bottled water, a powerful flashlight, and a multi-tool were critical. I even found a crowbar in the back of a utility truck, heavy and cold in my hand, a silent promise of defense against what I didn't know. The journey to Site Echo was a descent into an even deeper layer of the impossible. The highways, usually humming with life, were now a graveyard of steel and glass. Vehicles were frozen mid-lane, some with drivers slumped over the wheel, passengers caught in the middle of a laugh or a stretch. It was a macabre art exhibit, each scene a snapshot of a life abruptly halted. I drove my scavenged SUV, a large gas-guzzling beast that still had a full tank, through this silent tableau. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the crunch of my tires over shattered glass from a frozen accident. As I left the sprawling suburbs behind, the landscape began to change. The urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, then eventually, dense forest. The road became less maintained, narrower, winding deeper into what felt like uncharted territory. The silence here was different. No distant city hum, no frozen sirens. Just the whisper of the wind through stiff, motionless trees, and the constant thrum of my own heartbeat. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible with the rational. Was this a government facility? A private research lab? The name Site Echo felt deliberately vague, a typical designation for something clandestine. After hours of driving, the road abruptly ended at a heavy rusted gate. Beyond it, a dirt track disappeared into the trees. The gate was locked, but the chain was old and brittle. A few swings of the crowbar, and it snapped, echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. I pushed the gate open, wide enough to drive through, then abandoned the SUV, preferring to proceed on foot. The forest was thick, the path overgrown. I walked, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, the air growing colder, heavier. Finally, through a break in the trees, I saw it. Site Echo. It wasn't a grand, imposing structure like I'd imagined, but rather a series of low, reinforced concrete buildings nestled into a natural depression in the terrain. High chain-link fences, topped with razor wire, surrounded the perimeter, but sections were rusted, overgrown with vines. Security cameras were mounted at regular intervals, their lenses glazed over with frost, frozen watchers guarding nothing. The entire complex radiated a sense of abandonment, of something left unfinished. Finding an entry point wasn't difficult. A service gate on the far side of the complex hung ajar, seemingly ripped from its hinges by some unseen force. I slipped through, my heart hammering against my ribs. The ground inside was littered with debris, fallen branches, scattered tools, and what looked like parts of a ventilation system. The air was still, cold, and carried a faint, almost metallic scent, like ozone mixed with something burnt. I approached the largest building, a squat, windowless structure with a single heavy steel door. It was partially open, a dark maw inviting me into the unknown. I pushed it further, the rusty hinges groaning in protest, a sound that made me jump. Inside it was pitch black. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the absolute darkness, revealing a long, sterile corridor. The facility was a maze of identical hallways, each lined with heavy, unlabeled doors. It felt like walking through a tomb. The air was frigid, and my breath plumed in front of me. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every distant creak of the building settling made me flinch. I imagined the scientists, the engineers, the security personnel, all caught in their daily routines, frozen in place like the rest of the world. But where were they? I saw no bodies, no frozen figures inside. Was this place somehow evacuated just before the event? Or was it simply so secure that the effects were different within its walls? After what felt like an eternity, I found a control room. It was a chaos of monitors, blinking lights, and tangled wires. Several chairs were overturned. A coffee mug lay shattered on the floor, and papers were scattered everywhere. It looked like a sudden, violent evacuation, or perhaps a struggle. My flashlight beam danced over a large central console, its screens dark. I tried the power switch, but nothing happened. The facility was dead. My eyes scanned the room, searching for anything, any clue. On a desk half hidden beneath a stack of printouts, I found a thick leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a stylized symbol, a stylized clock with a broken gear. Below it, in faded gold lettering, were the words, Project Kronos, Dr. Elias Vance. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. This was it. The lead. I flipped it open, the pages stiff and cold. The handwriting was precise, academic initially. The entries detailed the inception of Project Kronos, an ambitious endeavor to manipulate localized temporal fields for energy generation and spatial displacement. It read like something out of a science fiction novel. Yet here I was, living its impossible consequences. The early entries were filled with optimism, scientific jargon, and complex diagrams I couldn't understand. Dr. Vance wrote about breakthroughs, about achieving microsecond temporal adjustments, and stable containment fields. He mentioned a team, a Dr. Anya Sharma, specializing in theoretical physics, and a head of security, Captain Robert Miller, expressing concerns about the project's inherent risks. As I continued to read, the tone shifted. The entries grew more erratic, the handwriting less precise. Vance started detailing unforeseen resonance effects and temporal bleed-through. He mentioned subjects experiencing localized time dilation, objects aging rapidly or de-aging, then reverting. There was a chilling entry about a test subject, a lab rat, that simply vanished, then reappeared moments later, but out of phase, flickering in and out of existence before disintegrating. The paranoia set in around page 70. Vance began to question the integrity of the containment field. He wrote frantically about anomalous energy spikes and a growing instability in the Kronos core. He suspected a saboteur or perhaps a fundamental flaw in their calculations. He mentioned a heated argument with Anya, who believed they were pushing too far, too fast, nearing a critical threshold. Then came the really disturbing entries. Vance wrote of a temporal pulse that occurred during a routine calibration test. It was small, localized, but it caused a momentary stasis field around the Kronos core. For a fraction of a second, everything within a few meters of the core simply stopped. Time ceased to flow for those objects. They reported it as a glitch, a containment ripple. But it wasn't a glitch, was it? It was a preview. The last few pages were almost illegible, scrawled in a frantic hand. Core unstable. Resonance cascade imminent. Anya was right. We broke it. The field, it's expanding. Out of control. We can't shut it down. It's absorbing energy, growing exponentially. It's too late. The world will. The entry ended abruptly, smeared with what looked like dried ink or perhaps blood. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an experiment, it was a doomsday device. Project Kronos, meant to control time, had instead fractured it, stopping the world for everyone but me. The overwhelming horror of it washed over me. This facility, this journal, held the answers, but it also painted a terrifying picture of a reality I couldn't comprehend. I looked up from the journal, my flashlight beam sweeping across the silent control room. The metallic smell in the air seemed stronger now, almost acrid. My eyes landed on a large, heavily reinforced door at the far end of the room, marked with a faded hazard symbol. Kronos core access. A low, almost imperceptible hum started to vibrate through the floor, a sound that hadn't been there moments ago. It was faint, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to Imon come from behind that door. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. The Kronos core. It was still active, and somehow it was calling to me. The thrum pulsed not just through the air, but through the very concrete beneath my feet, vibrating up into my bones. It was a low guttural hum, like a giant heart beating deep within the earth, and it was undeniably coming from behind that imposing door. My hand still tingling from the residual energy of the Kronos core's last known location, instinctively reached out, tracing the cold, unforgiving steel. There was no handle, no visible seam, just a monolithic slab of reinforced metal set flush into the wall. It looked more like a vault door than an entrance, designed to seal something in or keep something out with absolute finality. The calling intensified. It wasn't just a sound I heard with my ears. It was a frequency I felt, resonating deep within my bones, a primal hum that spoke to some uncharted part of my consciousness. It was a pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer, promising answers demanding attention. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it, the source of everything, the Chronos core. I pressed my ear against the cold metal, straining to hear beyond the thrumming. Nothing, just the relentless, deep vibration. I ran my hands over the surface again, searching for any kind of mechanism, a keypad, a hidden button, anything that would betray its secrets. The steel was seamless, impossibly smooth, with no visible hinges or locks. It was as if the door had been forged in one piece, or perhaps was merely a section of a wall that could open, but wasn't designed to reveal its function easily. Frustration began to bubble, quickly followed by a strange sense of desperation. I had come so far, endured so much, only to be stopped by an immovable barrier. I pushed against it, first gently, then with all my might, but the door didn't budge an inch. It was like pushing against a mountain. I even tried knocking, a futile gesture, the sound swallowed by the deep thrum. Then I noticed something, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer on the surface of the door, right at its center. It wasn't a reflection. It was as if the air around that spot was subtly distorted, like looking through heat haze, but without the heat. Curious, I reached out a finger, hesitant, and touched it. A jolt like static electricity shot through me. It wasn't painful but startling. And as my fingertip met the shimmering spot, the thrumming intensified, vibrating not just through the door, but directly into my arm, up to my shoulder, and then through my entire body. It was an overwhelming sensation, like being immersed in a giant tuning fork. The world around me, already frozen, seemed to hum in sympathy, the faint, shimmering distortions at the edges of my vision growing momentarily stronger. And then a click. Not a loud, mechanical click, but a soft, almost ethereal sound, like a lock disengaging from within the very fabric of the door. The shimmering spot brightened, pulsing with a soft, internal light. Slowly, silently, the massive steel door began to retract, not swinging open, but sliding inwards into the wall with an almost supernatural grace. No grinding metal, no screeching hinges, just a whisper of displaced air. My jaw dropped. The sight that met my eyes transcended anything I could have imagined. This wasn't just a room. It was a cathedral of time. The chamber was vast, circular, and impossibly high, easily dwarfing the entire building I was standing in. The walls weren't concrete, but a smooth, obsidian-like material that seemed to absorb all light, yet simultaneously shimmer with faint, internal patterns that shifted and flowed like liquid starlight. There were no visible lights, yet the entire space was bathed in an ethereal, pulsating azure glow that emanated from the very center of the room. And there it was, the Chronos core. It wasn't a machine in the conventional sense, not a simple device of gears and circuits. It was a colossal living sculpture, a nexus of pure, raw temporal energy. At its heart was a swirling vortex of iridescent light, a miniature galaxy of blues, purples, and silvers, twisting and contracting like a cosmic breath. This central anomaly pulsed with an unbearable intensity, and it was from this vortex that the azure glow permeated the entire chamber. Encircling this central vortex were intricate structures, not metal or plastic, but massive crystalline formations that reached towards the ceiling like ancient, petrified trees. These crystals were unlike anything I had ever seen, each one glowing faintly with its own internal light, some a deep sapphire, others a vibrant emerald, all of them humming in a silent chorus with the central vortex. They seemed to channel, amplify, or perhaps even contain the raw energy of the core. Thin, luminous tendrils of energy, like strands of pure light, arced between the crystals, creating a delicate, intricate web that hummed with silent power. The air in the chamber was thick with an almost palpable energy, a sensation that prickled my skin and made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something metallic and ancient, like deep earth and distant stars. The thrumming here was not just a sound. It was an all-encompassing vibration that resonated in every cell of my body, a profound hum that felt both utterly alien and strangely familiar. Felt like coming home. As I stepped fully into the chamber, the door slid shut behind me with the same silent grace, sealing me inside. The sound was so soft I barely registered it, my attention utterly captivated by the spectacle before me. My eyes scanned the room, desperately trying to take it all in. There were no control panels, no screens, no obvious signs of human interaction. This felt less like a laboratory and more like a sacred space, a monument to an impossible science. Driven by an irresistible urge, I began to walk towards the Chronos core, my footsteps echoing faintly on the obsidian floor. With every step, the pull intensified. It wasn't just magnetic, it was psychological, a deep-seated longing for connection, for understanding. The azure light grew brighter, casting shifting shadows that danced around the crystalline structures. I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if my mind was being sharpened, honed by the very presence of this temporal anomaly. As I drew closer, the central vortex seemed to expand and contract in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I could see into its depths now, not just light but fleeting fractured images. Glimpses of time not frozen but flowing. A bird in mid-flight, its wings blurring into a streak of motion, then gone. A ripple on water, expanding and disappearing. A human face contorted in an expression of joy or sorrow, too quick to register. It was like looking into a kaleidoscope made of pure time. The crystalline formations around the vortex were covered in intricate etchings, glowing symbols that pulsed with their own internal light. They were utterly alien, yet somehow I felt a faint resonance, a whisper of understanding brushing against the edges of my mind. It was a language without words, a communication beyond conventional thought. I reached the edge of the central platform where the Chronos core stood. The heat radiating from it was intense, not a burning heat, but a deep resonant warmth that seeped into my skin, warming me from the inside out. I looked down into the swirling vortex, mesmerized. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly profound. My hand on its own accord reached out, drawn towards the shimmering, twisting core of light. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to retreat, but the calling was too strong, too compelling. Felt like destiny. As my fingertips approached the edge of the vortex, the air crackled with energy, and the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Then my fingers passed through the invisible barrier. It wasn't solid, nor was it liquid. It was a sensation utterly beyond description. A rush of everything and nothing. A torrent of information, of moments, of raw temporal data flooded my mind, overwhelming my senses. I saw not just glimpses but entire lifetimes, entire histories, flashing before my inner eye in an instant. I felt the weight of every frozen moment, the silence of a world suspended, and the terrifying, exhilarating power of that suspension. But then amidst the chaos, a single image solidified, sharp and clear, cutting through the temporal noise like a knife. It wasn't from the past or the future, but a vision of the immediate present, a different perspective. I saw myself standing here in this chamber, hand outstretched towards the core. But in this vision, my face was contorted not in wonder, but in a silent scream. And behind me, emerging from the shadows near the closed door, was a figure. Tall, cloaked, indistinct, yet radiating an undeniable sense of malevolence. It was watching me, waiting, and in its hand something glinted, something sharp and undeniably dangerous. The vision vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me gasping, tearing my hand back from the core as if burned. The thrumming in the chamber persisted, but now it felt less like a calling and more like a warning. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, chilling realization. I wasn't alone, and I had just walked into a trap. The air in the circular chamber went cold, prickling my skin even as the oppressive heat of the thrumming energy remained. My gaze darted around, searching for a shadow, a glint of movement, anything that would betray the presence of another. But the statues remained frozen, the dust motes suspended, the faint light from the central pillar unwavering. Yet, the certainty that I was not alone, that I had been lured here, was a physical weight in my chest. Every fiber of my being screamed danger. Clever, a voice echoed, not from a specific point, but from the very air around me, resonating in my bones. It was low, ancient, and perfectly calm, yet it possessed an underlying hum of immense power that made the thrumming of the chamber seem almost like a whisper in comparison. You took longer than some, but you arrived just as predicted. My breath hitched. I spun, trying to pinpoint the source, but there was nothing. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, a presence without a form. It was like trying to catch smoke. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking, a pathetic squeak against the cavernous echo of the chamber. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in a cage, battering against my ribs. A soft, almost imperceptible chuckle rippled through the air, devoid of humor, more like the rustling of ancient leaves. A question for another time, perhaps. For now you may call me the architect. Though I did not design this place, I maintain it. And I have been waiting for you. Waiting for me? The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some random encounter. This was orchestrated. My unique condition, my terrifying isolation in a frozen world, it wasn't an accident. It was a prelude. Why me? I stammered, my mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. What is this place? What do you want? So many questions. The architect's voice hummed, a note of something akin to amusement in its tone. And all of them will be answered in due course. But first, let us establish a few truths. You are here because you are unique. You are here because you are unfrozen. The only one in this particular cycle who possesses such a distinction. This particular cycle. The word sent a shiver down my spine. It implied a beginning, an end, and perhaps a repetition. It implied that this had happened before. What do you mean, cycle? I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady, to project some semblance of control, though internally I was spiraling. Are there others? Other unfrozen people? In other cycles, yes, the architect responded, its voice unhurried, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. But not in yours. Not in this iteration of the temporal stasis. You are, as I said, unique, a singular anomaly. And that, my friend, is precisely why you are so valuable. Valuable. The word tasted bitter. It stripped away any lingering hope that this was a benevolent entity, a guide. This was a captor, a manipulator. What do you want with me? I repeated, my voice now laced with a desperate urgency. I scanned the chamber again, not for an attacker, but for an exit, a crack, anything. But the walls were seamless, the pillars solid. The entrance I'd come through now seemed to have vanished, or perhaps I had simply forgotten its exact location in my fear. The overwhelming sense of being enclosed was suffocating. Your perspective, the architect stated without hesitation. Your ability to observe, to interact, to move within the frozen moment. It is an invaluable resource. The world has stopped, but you have not. You are a living lens through which the halted universe can be examined. Examined for what? I shot back, frustration battling with fear. This was all too abstract, too grand. I just wanted to go home, to wake up from this nightmare. For its flaws, the architect replied, a colder edge entering its voice. For the points of divergence. For the subtle imperfections that lead to collapse. This stasis, as you call it, is not natural. It is a symptom, a pause, a desperate measure to prevent something far worse. My mind reeled. A desperate measure? To prevent something worse? Was the entire world frozen to stop some cataclysm? And I was somehow a part of the solution, or the key to understanding it. What collapse? What are you talking about? I demanded, my hands clenching into fists. I felt a surge of anger, a desperate need to lash out at this unseen, all-knowing entity. The fabric of existence, my dear unfrozen. The architect purred, the sound chilling. The delicate balance of time and causality. It is fragile, prone to fracture. And when it fractures, the consequences are undesirable. This temporal stasis is a protective shell, a moment stretched to infinity, designed to hold everything together until the flaw can be identified and corrected. And you think I can do that? I scoffed, incredulous. I'm just a person. I don't understand any of this. Precisely, the architect said, a triumphant note in its tone. Your lack of understanding is your strength. You are an unbiased observer, untainted by prior knowledge or expectation. You experience the stasis as it truly is, a broken reality, and your unique state allows you to navigate it, to seek out the points of stress, the anomalies within the anomaly. It felt like a game, a twisted experiment, and I was the unwitting lab rat. But the stakes weren't just my life. They were the entire world's. So you brought me here, I said, a dawning horror creeping in. You've been guiding me. All of it. The whispers, the flashes, the feeling I wasn't alone. That was you. Indeed, the architect confirmed. A necessary nudge. You required direction. This chamber, these conduits, they amplify the subtle energies that allow for such interaction. The thrumming, as you perceive it, is the very pulse of this protective field, and the conduits you have observed are pathways for information, for energy, for insight. I looked at the central pillar, then at the surrounding conduits, the ones I'd felt drawn to, the ones that had hummed with a strange energy. They weren't just ancient relics. They were active, part of a vast, incomprehensible machine, and I had walked right into its core. What happens if I refuse? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I knew the architect would hear every syllable. The chamber seemed to grow stiller, if that were possible. The thrumming, which had been a constant backdrop, now felt heavier, more menacing. Refusal is not an option, the architect stated, its voice losing its previous detached amusement, becoming cold, absolute. Your existence within the stasis is contingent upon your cooperation. You are tethered to this purpose, whether you embrace it or not. The alternative is simple. You will cease to be unfrozen. You will become another part of the halted world, another statue in time. The threat hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. To be frozen again, but this time knowing what I knew, knowing that the world was trapped, and I had been offered a chance to understand, perhaps even to fix it, only to refuse and become another helpless observer? The thought was terrifying. It was a fate worse than my current terrifying freedom. What do you want me to do? I asked, my shoulders slumping in defeat. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, calculating fear. There was no escape. You will continue your journey, the architect instructed, its voice regaining a measure of its earlier, calmer tone, though it was still laced with an undeniable authority. You will explore. You will observe. You will seek out the anomalies that defy the perfect stasis. The things that flicker, the sounds that echo, the objects that seem out of place. They are the cracks in the shell, the indicators of the underlying flaw. And how do I know what to look for? I asked, my mind already trying to process this impossible task. You will know, the architect assured me. Your unique state grants you an intuitive connection to these temporal stresses. You will feel them. They will call to you just as this chamber called to you. And when you find something significant, something that resonates with the fracturing of time, you will return here. This chamber is a beacon, a focal point. It will receive your insights, and I will interpret them. So I'm your detective, I muttered, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Your errand boy in a frozen world. You are the critical component, the architect corrected, its voice firm, the only one capable of discerning the subtle nuances. Others have been less successful in their observations. Their perspectives were clouded, their resolve fragile. But you, Michael, you have demonstrated a unique resilience, a tenacity that is promising. Michael. The sound of my own name, spoken by this disembodied ancient voice, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. It knew me. It knew everything. There was no hiding, no pretense. I was utterly exposed. This is not a game, Michael, the architect continued, as if sensing my internal turmoil. The stakes are absolute. The continued existence of your reality, of every frozen soul you have encountered, depends on your success. The clock, though it appears stopped, is still ticking. And the flaw, the fracture in time, it grows. Find it, or everything, truly everything, will be lost. The thrumming intensified, vibrating through the very stone beneath my feet, through my bones, through my soul. The chamber seemed to glow with a furious internal light. I was trapped, a pawn in a cosmic struggle, tasked with saving a world I barely understood from a threat I couldn't even comprehend, guided by an unseen entity whose true motives remained shrouded in mystery. My journey through the frozen world had just taken a terrifying, irreversible turn. I was no longer just an observer. I was humanity's last desperate hope, and the weight of it, the crushing, impossible burden, threatened to break me before I even took my first step. I stood there, the device humming faintly in my hand, its eerie glow reflecting in my wide, disbelieving eyes. Humanity's last hope. The words echoed in the profound silence, amplifying the terror that had begun to coil around my heart. It wasn't just the idea of failure, of letting down billions of frozen souls. It was the sheer, unadulterated loneliness of it all. Every fiber of my being screamed for someone else, anyone, to share this impossible burden. But there was no one. Only me. My breath hitched. I had to move. I couldn't afford a breakdown, not now, not ever. The device, my only guide, seemed to vibrate with a silent urgency. Its needle, once lazily pointing north, now pulsed, swaying ever so slightly, indicating a direction. and the numbers, a chaotic jumble before, now seemed to coalesce, displaying a large decreasing value. Distance. Intensity. I had to assume it was leading me closer to the source, and the numbers were a countdown or perhaps a proximity indicator. The first step was the hardest. It wasn't just physical. It was a mental leap from passive survival to active, world-saving mission. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. Every frozen face, every inanimate object, was a monument to the catastrophe I had to undo. I needed supplies, a vehicle, and a plan that extended beyond the immediate block. Food, water, warmth. These were immediate necessities. I raided my own pantry, then with a heavy heart, stepped out into the frozen world, my device held tight. The street was a diorama of interrupted lives. A delivery truck, keys still in the ignition, driver frozen mid-step, offered an immediate solution for transport. It was a sturdy, enclosed vehicle perfect for carrying supplies and offering some shelter. Inside, I found a half-eaten sandwich, a thermos of cold coffee, and a surprisingly full tank of gas. It felt like a small, grim blessing. My next stop was a large supermarket a few blocks away. The automatic doors were frozen open, a silent invitation to a bounty of suspended commerce. It was a surreal experience, pushing a cart through aisles of perfectly preserved goods, surrounded by frozen shoppers, their expressions ranging from exasperation to boredom. I grabbed non-perishables, canned goods, protein bars, bottled water. I also found a first aid kit, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a thick sleeping bag. Practicality over preference. This wasn't a shopping trip. It was provisioning for the apocalypse. As I moved, the device in my hand became my compass. Its needle pulled me steadily eastward, and the numbers continued to tick down, slowly but surely. It confirmed my theory. I was getting closer. But closer to what? A laboratory? A power plant? A cosmic anomaly? My mind raced, trying to conjure a plausible scenario. But every possibility felt equally absurd and terrifying. Back in the delivery truck, I loaded my haul. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the device and the soft creak of the truck's suspension as I navigated the eerily empty streets. Driving felt like a sacrilege, a violation of the stillness. Every turn, every acceleration felt like a jarring disruption. But I had to move. The device led me out of the city, onto the interstate. The highway, usually a roaring river of steel and humanity, was now a frozen artery. Cars were stopped mid-lane, some with drivers still gripping the wheel, others with families caught in the middle of a road trip. It was a chilling testament to the instantaneous nature of the freeze. There was no warning, no time to react. Just silence. Hours blurred into a monotonous, unsettling journey. The sun, a persistent, unmoving orb in the sky, cast long, unchanging shadows. My internal clock was useless. I ate when hunger gnawed, rested when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, but the sense of urgency never truly faded. The device, my unwavering guide, pulled me further and further east, through small towns, across vast, empty farmlands, and eventually, towards a landscape that became increasingly rugged and unfamiliar. The numbers on the device were now in the low hundreds, and the needle vibrated with a more intense urgency. The air outside the truck seemed to grow colder, even though physically it shouldn't have changed. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but I felt it deep in my bones. It was as if the very essence of the freeze was more concentrated here. Then the device's readings began to fluctuate wildly. The needle twitched, darted left and right, then settled on a point directly ahead, vibrating furiously. The numbers, which had been steadily decreasing, suddenly stalled, then began to increase rapidly, jumping by tens, then hundreds. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did that mean? Was I moving away from it? Or was the source itself unstable? I pulled the truck over, scanning the horizon. We were in a sparsely populated region, rolling hills covered in dense evergreen forests. Ahead, shrouded in a perpetual frozen haze, I saw the faint outline of something massive. It looked like a mountain, but its peak was unnaturally flat, almost as if it had been sheared off. And at its very top, even from this distance, I could discern a strange, dark structure, perfectly geometric, completely out of place in the natural landscape. The device in my hand was screaming now, its hum a frantic whine. The numbers were climbing, not decreasing, and the needle was locked onto that distant, ominous structure. It wasn't just a source, it was a generator. And whatever it was far more powerful, far more active than I could have ever imagined. The world hadn't just frozen, it had been activated, and I was driving straight into the heart of its machine. A chilling realization dawned on me. The machine wasn't just there, it was doing something, and the closer I got, the more intense its mysterious energy field became, causing the device to spike its readings. This wasn't just about finding the source, it was about confronting it directly. And something told me, with a cold certainty that seeped into my very soul, that this structure, this dark monolith on the distant mountain, was not designed to be found. It was designed to operate undisturbed forever. My mission had just become infinitely more dangerous. The world had frozen for everyone but me, and now it seemed the world was fighting back. The world had frozen for everyone but me, and now it seemed the world was fighting back. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow. This wasn't just an abandoned scientific outpost, a relic of a bygone era. This was an active sentient entity, or at least, a system designed with an almost malevolent self-preservation instinct. The sheer scale of that thought, the implications of a structure so vast and deep that it could exert its will over its surroundings, was paralyzing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the profound silence. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, to flee this cursed mountain, to forget the answers I so desperately sought. But I couldn't. Not now. I'd come too far, seen too much. The frozen world, my unique existence within it, the cryptic journals, they were all threads leading to this one terrifying knot. I pulled back from the main entrance, retreating behind a jagged outcrop of ice-encrusted rock. My breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhale a visible testament to my fear. I watched the colossal metallic doors, half buried in the snow, for any sign of movement. First, nothing, just the same unyielding, silent presence. Then a low hum began, imperceptible at first, a vibration I felt more than heard, resonating deep in the bedrock beneath my feet. It was like the mountain itself was clearing its throat, preparing to speak. A faint, almost invisible shimmer appeared across the surface of the doors, like heat haze on a summer road. But this was a heat haze in a world of absolute zero. It expanded, encompassing the entire entrance, solidifying into a translucent barrier that pulsed with an internal, violet light. It wasn't a solid wall, not yet, but a warning. An energy field, perhaps, or some kind of sensor array. Whatever it was, it screamed, "Do not enter." The facility was not just passively protecting itself. It was actively reacting to my presence, my intent. My unique ability to move was not an advantage here. It was a beacon, a threat. I unshouldered my pack, pulling out the worn leather journal, its pages brittle from the cold. I needed to reread everything, look for any detail I might have missed, any clue about what this place truly was, what its purpose was, and why it was so intent on remaining undisturbed. David Miller's frantic scrawl, Jessica Hayes' analytical entries, Michael Chen's chilling final words, they pulsed with new meaning now. Jessica's entries spoke of Project Chimera, a temporal stabilization field, and a controlled reset. Michael Chen's last notes mentioned the purpose, the great silence, and the final sleep. I remembered his chilling words. We didn't just freeze time, we froze existence. And then, the facility will maintain the stasis. It is its core function. It must not be disturbed. Ever. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. What if the frozen world wasn't an accident, or a natural phenomenon, but the intended outcome of Project Chimera? What if this immense facility was not just a research station, but the very engine that maintained the global stasis? And if that was true, then my movement, my very presence, was a catastrophic anomaly. I wasn't just an explorer. I was a glitch in the system, a rogue variable that threatened to unravel the entire frozen reality. This explained the defenses. This explained the hostility. I wasn't just breaking into a building. I was tampering with a mechanism that held the entire world captive. And the mechanism was fighting back. I needed a new approach. The main entrance was clearly a death trap now. But a facility of this size, designed to operate for what could only be described as an eternity, had to have other access points. Service tunnels, emergency exits, ventilation shafts, something less obvious, less heavily guarded. My only hope was to find one, and quickly, before the facility's defenses escalated from warning to full-on attack. I spent the next several hours circling the base of the mountain, keeping a wide berth from the glowing main entrance. The wind, which had been relatively calm, began to pick up, not just in intensity, but in its very nature. It wasn't natural. It was localized, cutting, and seemed to originate from the mountain itself, whipping around me in unpredictable gusts that threatened to knock me off my feet. Ice crystals sharp as glass shards were carried on these phantom winds, stinging my exposed skin. My compass, which had been reliable, began to spin wildly, its needle twitching erratically. My GPS device, usually a steadfast companion, displayed an error message, then flatlined. The mountain was actively interfering with my electronics, creating a localized electromagnetic disturbance. It was as if the facility was generating its own weather, its own field of influence, pushing me away, disorienting me. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous. What had been stable ice fields now seemed to shift underfoot, hidden crevasses appearing where there had been none before. The air grew impossibly cold in certain pockets, a biting raw chill that seeped into my bones despite my insulated gear, forcing me to move quickly through these zones of extreme temperature. The mountain was alive, hostile, and utterly alien. I pushed on, driven by a desperate need for answers, my eyes scanning every inch of the rock face, every drift of snow. Hours blurred into a relentless ordeal of frozen wind and disorienting energy fields. Just as despair began to creep in, a dark, jagged opening caught my eye, partially obscured by a massive snowdrift. It wasn't a grand entrance, or even a well-maintained one. It looked more like a utility access tunnel, a forgotten service hatch perhaps, or an emergency egress, blasted open by some ancient seismic event and then slowly buried by centuries of snow. It was a narrow, uninviting maw, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, and it led into absolute darkness. The air emanating from it was still and stale, a stark contrast to the raging winds outside. No violet shimmer, no low hum, no spinning compass. It seemed untouched by the facility's immediate defenses, a blind spot, or perhaps a trap so subtle it didn't need overt warnings. I hesitated, my hand gripping the frozen rock face beside the opening. This was it, the point of no return. To go in was to fully commit, to step into the belly of the beast. The fear was immense, a cold, heavy weight in my chest. But the alternative was to remain outside, exposed to the escalating, unnatural elements, slowly freezing, slowly starving, never knowing why. There was no choice. I had come for answers, and they lay within that mountain. I took a deep, shaky breath, adjusted my pack, and without another thought, I squeezed myself into the claustrophobic darkness, leaving the frozen, fighting world behind. The darkness was absolute, pressing in on me like a physical weight. The air grew colder with every inch I squeezed forward, carrying the faint, metallic tang of something ancient and artificial. My breath plumed in front of me, a tiny fleeting cloud in the crushing black. The claustrophobia was overwhelming, a primal fear that screamed at me to turn back, but the image of the frozen world, of Jessica caught in mid-scream, spurred me on. I crawled, scraped, and pushed, feeling the rough, unyielding rock against my hands and knees, until the passage abruptly widened. A faint hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the air. I stopped straining my ears. It was too regular, too mechanical to be natural. I fumbled for my high-powered flashlight, its beam cutting a stark path through the gloom. The cave ceiling was still jagged rock, but the floor beneath my hands was no longer earth and stone. It was a smooth, cold, metallic surface. The walls, too, quickly transitioned from natural rock to reinforced concrete, scarred with what looked like blast marks and emergency lighting fixtures that had long since died. This wasn't a cave. It was an entrance to something hidden deep within the mountain. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of both fear and exhilaration. I was right. All of it. The impossible freeze, the strange energy, the mountain. It all led here. I stood, my muscles protesting, and swept the beam around. I was in a narrow corridor, stretching into the darkness in both directions. The air was still and cold, but the metallic tang was stronger now, mixed with the faint scent of ozone and dust. It was like stepping into a tomb, but one that had been abandoned in a desperate hurry. I chose a direction at random and began to walk, my footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. The corridor was long, punctuated by heavy, sealed doors on either side, each marked with faded hazard symbols and alphanumeric codes I couldn't decipher. Most were closed tight, but one stood ajar, a sliver of darkness within darkness. Hesitantly, I pushed it open further. The room beyond was a small, cramped office, or what used to be one. A desk was overturned, papers scattered across the floor. A cracked coffee mug lay on its side, a dark, dried ring on the metal surface beneath it. A half-eaten energy bar, still in its wrapper, sat on a monitor that was now dark and lifeless. It was a snapshot of a moment interrupted, an ordinary workday violently brought to a halt. This wasn't a long-term abandonment. This was sudden, catastrophic. My gaze fell upon a whiteboard on the far wall. Scrawled notes and complex equations filled it, some erased, some underlined. My eyes darted to a diagram, crudely drawn but unmistakably showing a series of concentric circles, with a central point labeled anomaly. Arrows pointed outward, labeled temporal flux, reality shear, and stasis field. My blood ran cold. Stasis field. That's what this was. That's what the world was trapped in. My breath hitched. They hadn't been trying to create the freeze. They had been trying to contain something called the anomaly, and the stasis field was a desperate attempt to deal with its effects. I pushed further into the facility, driven by a desperate need to understand. The corridors branched, forming a labyrinth of dead-end labs and control rooms. I passed through a cafeteria where trays of still frozen food sat on tables, untouched forks beside them. A locker room with uniforms hanging neatly, waiting for their wearers to return. Every detail screamed of a sudden brutal stop. The freeze hadn't spared the people who worked here either. They were caught in it just like everyone else. Finally, after what felt like hours of navigating the silent, echoing halls, I found it. A central operations room. It was larger than the others, filled with dozens of consoles, all dark. A massive holographic projector stood in the center, its surface a dull, opaque gray. But one console, tucked away in a corner, still hummed faintly, a single green light blinking rhythmically. My heart leaped. Power. Still had power. I rushed to it, my hands trembling as I powered up the screen. It flickered to life, displaying a login prompt. My hopes plummeted. What were the chances I'd guess a password? But then, a message flashed. Emergency override activated. Guest access granted. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh surge of dread. Emergency override. This wasn't good. The screen filled with data, log files, project summaries, warning alerts. My eyes scanned frantically, trying to make sense of the dense technical jargon. The project name was Project Kronos. Its stated goal: investigation and mitigation of emerging temporal instabilities within localized spacetime. Temporal instabilities. That was a fancy way of saying reality was breaking. I scrolled down, past endless lines of code and scientific reports, until I found a section labeled Critical Events Log. The entries were recent, dating back just weeks before the freeze. Asterisk entry 10/12/20XX. Dr. Evelyn Reed asterisk fluctuations in the anomaly's energy signature are increasing. Containment field integrity at 87%. Recommend immediate review of stasis protocol contingency. Asterisk entry 10/15/20XX. Dr. Michael Chan asterisk. Anomaly manifesting localized time dilation effects. Test subject, Alpha 7 experience rapid aging, followed by complete temporal disintegration upon exposure to unfiltered energy burst. Containment field integrity at 82%. Stasis protocol review critical. Asterisk entry 10/18/20XX. Dr. Evelyn Reed asterisk. The anomaly is growing. It's not just a localized event anymore. It's radiating. We're seeing microfreezes in major cities. We need to activate the stasis protocol now before it's too late. This could be our only chance to prevent total chronological collapse. Asterisk entry 10/20/20XX. Dr. David Miller asterisk. Stasis protocol initiated. Phase 1. Global temporal lock engaged. Purpose: isolate and stabilize the anomaly's expanding influence. Estimated duration: unknown. Probability of success: low. God help us all. My breath caught in my throat. Global temporal lock. That was it. That was the freeze. It wasn't natural. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort by these scientists to save the world from something called the anomaly, something that was causing chronological collapse. And the freeze was supposed to stabilize it, but it seemed to have caught them too. And me? Why was I immune? I scrolled frantically, looking for answers about my immunity. There was nothing. Just more logs about the anomaly, its terrifying power, and the increasing desperation of the scientists. Then I saw it. A final entry dated just moments before the global temporal lock engaged. Asterisk entry 10/20/20XX. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Personal log. It's done. The stasis protocol is active. The world is frozen. But there's a problem. Catastrophic one. The anomaly isn't stable within the stasis field. It's adapting. And the field itself is degrading. We estimated a minimum of 72 hours before critical failure. But the latest projections show less than 24. If the stasis field fails, the chronological collapse won't just resume. It will accelerate. It will unravel everything everywhere, all at once. There's only one variable we didn't account for. A null point individual, immune to the temporal lock. If such a person exists, they would be our only hope, the only chance to reverse it. But they would need to reach the anomaly's core. And that's where the real danger lies. The anomaly isn't just a temporal distortion. It's a gateway. And something is trying to come through. My blood ran cold. Less than 24 hours. The stasis field was failing. And the anomaly was a gateway. To what? Something was trying to come through? The screen flickered. A new message appeared, overlaying the logs, glowing a menacing red. Warning. Stasis field integrity critical. 12 hours 47 minutes and 3 seconds remaining until total collapse. 12 hours. 12 hours until the world didn't just unfreeze, but unraveled. And I was the null point individual, the only one who could stop it. But how? And what was waiting on the other side of that gateway? The hum of the facility, which had been a faint drone, now seemed to pulse, growing louder, more urgent, like a dying heart struggling for one last beat. The hum of the facility, which had been a faint drone, now seemed to pulse, growing louder, more urgent, like a dying heart struggling for one last beat. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a vibration that resonated through the very concrete beneath my feet, up my legs and into my bones. The air crackled with an unseen energy, carrying a metallic tang that stung my nostrils. I stared at the colossal structure before me, the gateway, as Thorne had called it. It was no longer merely a shimmering void. It had taken on a more defined, terrifying form, a monolithic obsidian obelisk, easily 50 feet tall, embedded in the center of the chamber. Its surface, once smooth and reflective, now pulsed with an internal violet light, like a monstrous alien heart. Threads of this light, thin and erratic, snaked across the floor, reaching out like grasping tendrils. This wasn't a gateway to somewhere. This was a gateway that was unmaking somewhere. It was a tear, not a portal. A wound, not a door. A sudden sharp tremor rocked the chamber, dislodging dust and small fragments of plaster from the ceiling. A section of the main console, previously dark, sparked violently and then died, plunging that corner of the room into deeper shadow. Time was running out. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming pulse of the failing monolith. I felt a surreal detachment, as if I were watching myself in a movie, but the cold sweat trickling down my spine reminded me this was horrifyingly real. I was the only one moving, the only one breathing, the only one who could stop it. But how? And what was waiting on the other side of that gateway? The hum of the facility, which had been a faint drone, now seemed to pulse, growing louder, more urgent, like a dying heart struggling for one last beat. I forced myself to move, my feet heavy, each step a conscious effort against the growing pressure in the air. I circled the monstrous obelisk, my eyes darting, searching for anything, a control panel, a hidden access point, a clue. The violet light intensified, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that danced and writhed along the walls. The air grew colder, but it was a strange, unnatural cold, not the chill of winter, but the absence of warmth, the draining of energy. It felt like reality itself was being leached away. Then I saw it. Tucked away behind a collapsed section of a secondary console, almost obscured by fallen debris, was a smaller, distinct panel. Unlike the rest of the facility's brutalist design, this panel was sleek, almost organic, crafted from a material that seemed to absorb the ambient light, yet glowed with a faint, almost imperceptible blue luminescence. It had no visible buttons, no obvious screen. It was simply a smooth, dark surface, centered with a circular indentation. As I approached, the blue glow intensified, and a faint, almost inaudible hum emanated from it, distinct from the overwhelming thrum of the obelisk. It was a beckoning hum, a whisper in the cacophony. My hand almost instinctively reached out. As my fingertips brushed the surface, the circular indentation deepened, and a holographic projection shimmered into existence above it. It was Dr. Elias Thorne. His image was flickering, distorted by the temporal instability, but his face was clear, etched with a profound weariness and desperation I hadn't seen in our brief, frozen encounters. His eyes, normally sharp and calculating, now held a haunted, almost pleading look. "If you are seeing this," his holographic voice began, his words cracking and dissolving at the edges, then it has happened, or it is happening, and I have failed." My breath caught in my throat. He was speaking directly to me across the gulf of time, across the chasm of what he had wrought. "My name is Elias Thorne. I did not create the temporal anomaly you are experiencing. No, it was already here. A growing instability, a bleed from another dimension, another time slowly eroding our own. I spent decades trying to understand it, to contain it. The gateway, this facility, it was meant to be an anchor, a temporal stabilizer, to reinforce the fabric of our reality, to push back against the intrusion." His holographic hand gestured, and the image of the colossal obelisk behind him flickered into view, then dissolved back into his tormented face. But I underestimated it. I miscalculated. The energy required, the feedback loop, it didn't stabilize. It inverted. Instead of anchoring reality, it began to pull it, to draw everything out of time, to freeze it in an instant, an eternal present, disconnected from the flow. My mind reeled. So the freeze wasn't an intended outcome, but a catastrophic failure, a side effect of a desperate attempt to save reality. "And you," Thorne continued, his eyes seeming to bore directly into mine, "you are the variable, the unexpected anomaly within the anomaly. For reasons I could never fully comprehend, you are immune. Your temporal signature, it resonates differently. It is stable, unaffected by the pull. You are, in essence, an anchor yourself, a living counter-frequency." The weight of his words slammed into me, a physical blow. An anchor, a counter-frequency. My immunity wasn't just luck, it was a fundamental aspect of who I was, and it was the key. I tried every fail-safe. Thorne's voice grew more frantic. Every protocol. But once the inversion began, once the bleed started to consume our reality, there was no stopping it from within the system. It needed an external catalyst, a recalibration, someone who could manually resync the feedback, to reverse the pull, to push reality back into its proper flow. He paused, his holographic image flickering violently, as if struggling to maintain coherence. "That someone is you, David." He knew my name. Of course, he would have known everything about the anomaly that was me. "This console," Thorne indicated the panel I was touching, "is designed to interface with the primary system. Not to control it, but to become part of it. To inject your unique temporal signature directly into the gateway's core. To use your stability as a living bridge, to re-establish the temporal flow. It will be immensely dangerous." My blood ran cold. Dangerous felt like an understatement. He was asking me to become a part of this monstrous machine, to risk being absorbed, torn apart, or worse, lost in the very temporal void it was creating. "The process," Thorne continued, his voice now a strained whisper, "will require you to place your hand, your entire hand, onto the circular indentation. It will form a direct neural and temporal link. You will feel everything. The pull, the instability, the raw power of the anomaly. You must hold on. You must focus. You must project your stability into the heart of the gateway. Envision reality reforming, time flowing again." His image flickered, distorted into static for a moment, then reformed, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. "There is a failsafe, a manual override. If the strain becomes too great, if you feel yourself being consumed, you must pull your hand away. It will sever the connection. But if you do, the gateway will continue its inversion. Reality will collapse completely. There will be no second chance. No one else." The chamber shuddered again, more violently this time. A deep guttural groan echoed from the heart of the obelisk, and the violet light pulsed with terrifying intensity, now accompanied by crackling arcs of raw energy that leaped across its surface. The hum was no longer a hum. It was a shriek, a tearing sound that grated on my very soul. "The facility itself is failing." Thorne's voice was barely audible over the rising din. "It cannot contain the feedback much longer. You have minutes, David. Maybe less. If you succeed, the gateway will stabilize. The temporal flow will resume. The freeze, it will end. If you fail, well, there will be no if you fail for anyone. Just nothing. His holographic image began to pixelate, dissolving at the edges. I am sorry, David. So profoundly sorry. I tried to save us all. Now it is up to you. Be brave. With a final desperate look, Thorn's image shattered into a million sparkling motes of light, fading into non-existence. I stood there, trembling, the weight of his words, the enormity of the task crushing down on me. The circular indentation on the console pulsed with a brighter, more insistent blue. It was calling to me. The very air was thick with the scent of ozone and the metallic tang of impending disaster. Outside, beyond these walls, an entire world, millions of lives, my family, my friends, Jessica. They were all waiting, frozen, trapped, dependent on me. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. What if I wasn't strong enough? What if I was consumed, my consciousness scattered into the temporal void? What if I pulled away, condemning everyone? But the alternative, the complete annihilation of everything, that was a far more terrifying prospect. I looked at my hand, the one that had brushed against frozen faces, the one that had navigated this impossible world. It was just a hand, flesh and bone. But Thorn believed it was more. He believed it was the key. The obelisk roared, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of existence. The violet light flared, bathing the entire chamber in its eerie glow, and the entire facility groaned as if under immense, unbearable strain. Dust rained down in sheets. The lights flickered, threatening to die completely. This was it, the moment of truth. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against the symphony of destruction. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady my racing pulse. My gaze fixed on the glowing blue indentation. There was no going back. There was no other choice. With a resolve born of pure terror and an unshakable sense of duty, I extended my right hand, palm open, fingers splayed. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing Jessica's face, my parents, the vibrant, living world I remembered. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, I pressed my entire hand firmly onto the glowing blue circle. A jolt like 1,000 volts of electricity coursed through my arm, shooting up to my shoulder, then exploding through my entire body. It wasn't just pain. It was an overwhelming sensation of being simultaneously stretched and compressed, pulled in every direction at once. My vision exploded into a kaleidoscope of colors, shapes, and what felt like raw, unfiltered time. The world spun. The shriek of the obelisk intensified, and I felt a searing heat spread from my hand, as if I had plunged it into a star. My body seized, every muscle locking, every nerve ending screaming. I was no longer just standing in a chamber. I was connected. I was the bridge, and the gateway was trying to tear me apart. The surge wasn't just pain. It was the universe screaming into my mind. Every atom in my body vibrated, threatening to fly apart. I saw flashes of light that weren't light, but pure information, equations that described the birth and death of stars, the curvature of space, the relentless march of time, all compressed into an instant. I felt the weight of every past moment, every future possibility, pressing down on me, through me. My consciousness stretched, thin and fragile, across an infinite canvas. I was no longer Michael. I was a conduit, a whisper on the wind of creation, a pinprick of awareness in the roaring current of existence. The chamber around me, the intricate patterns on the walls, the very air, dissolved into a shimmering haze of energy. I was floating in an abyss of pure potential. The sensation of being torn apart began to shift, to transform. It wasn't destruction. It was reconstruction. My mind, my very soul, was being rewritten, expanded to comprehend what was happening. And then the whisper became a voice. Not a sound I heard with my ears, but knowledge projected directly into the core of my being. It was the voice of the gateway, or perhaps the voice through the gateway. It spoke of balance, of a delicate equilibrium that governed all things. It spoke of a ripple, a subtle tremor in the fabric of causality, a distortion that threatened to unravel the very threads of existence. To prevent total collapse, the universe, in its infinite self-correcting wisdom, had initiated a temporal stasis, a universal pause. The world froze, and I was an anomaly, a glitch in the stasis field. My unique neurological signature, perhaps a subtle deviation in the way my consciousness interacted with temporal fields, meant I existed just outside the parameters of the universal pause. I wasn't immune because I was chosen or special in a heroic sense. I was immune because I was a statistical improbability, an oversight, a single flickering candle in a world plunged into darkness. The gateway, this ancient device, was not a weapon but an anchor, the central nervous system of reality's emergency system. And by touching it, I hadn't activated it. I had completed it. I was the missing piece, the conduit through which the system could recalibrate, reboot. The agony subsided, replaced by an unparalleled clarity. I understood the purpose of the frozen figures, the echoes of their last moments. They were not dead. They were suspended, their consciousness held in a delicate balance, waiting for me. The voice, now more a gentle hum of understanding, presented me with a choice. I could maintain the stasis, leaving the world suspended indefinitely, a perfect, unchanging tableau, safe from the ripple but forever inert. Or I could release it. I could allow the threads of time to reweave, to mend themselves, to flow once more. But if I chose to release, there was a risk. The ripple, though contained, was still there, a scar on the face of reality. The future was uncertain, and I, Michael, would be changed, forever. My mind raced through the faces I had seen. Jessica, frozen mid-sentence, her eyes wide with concern. David, caught in a moment of quiet contemplation. Emily, forever laughing. Could I sentence them to an eternal, perfect stillness? Could I condemn them to a non-existence, even if it was safe? The thought was unbearable. Life, with all its chaos, its pain, its mistakes, was still life. It was movement, choice, consequence. It was worth fighting for. My resolve hardened. I wouldn't leave them. I wouldn't leave anyone. With a surge of will that felt like tearing my own soul, I reached out through the connection, through the gateway, through the very fabric of time itself. I chose to release. The hum intensified, becoming a crescendo of pure energy. The shimmering abyss around me began to coalesce, to solidify. The chamber walls reappeared, sharper, more defined than before. The symbols on them pulsed with a soft, steady light, no longer threatening but resonant. I felt a tremendous pull, as if gravity itself was being reinstated with a vengeance, dragging my expanded consciousness back into the confines of my body. It was like shrinking from an infinite being back into a single finite man. A gasp tore from my throat as I collapsed to my knees, the white-hot energy receding from my hand, leaving it tingling and numb. My muscles screamed, my head throbbed, but it was a familiar pain, a human pain, a welcome pain. I was back. And then the world unfroze. It wasn't a sudden snap, but a wave starting from me, emanating outwards. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the stone floor. The air around me, once utterly still, stirred. Dust motes, suspended for what felt like an eternity, drifted. And then the sounds began. Faint at first, a distant, almost forgotten hum. A low drone like the collective breath of a slumbering city. It grew slowly, steadily, filling the chamber. The soft thrum of the city's heart, now beating again. I could hear the distant rumble of traffic, the faint wail of a siren, the murmur of 1,000 conversations. It was overwhelming, a cacophony after the profound silence, but it was glorious. It was the sound of life. I stumbled out of the chamber, my legs unsteady, my mind reeling. The corridor was no longer bathed in an eerie light, but in the harsh fluorescent glow of the building's emergency lights. The frozen security guard, etched in mid-stride, now blurred into motion. His foot landed with a soft thud. His eyes blinked. He glanced at his watch with a frown, then continued his patrol, completely oblivious. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had worked. I forced myself to move, to run, to find the others. The stairwell was alive with the sound of footsteps. The lobby was bustling. People were moving, talking, laughing. The coffee Jessica had been reaching for was now in her hand. Her lips were moving, completing the sentence she had started what felt like a lifetime ago. "Michael, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Her eyes, filled with genuine concern, met mine. She didn't remember. None of them did. The universal pause had been just that, a pause. Their consciousness had simply resumed from the exact moment it had frozen. For them, no time had passed at all. For them, the world had never frozen. I could only stare at her, the enormity of what I had experienced, what I now knew crashing down on me. How could I explain? How could I tell her that I had walked through a world of statues, that I had touched the very heart of reality, that I had held the fate of every living thing in my hand? "I'm fine, Jessica," I managed, my voice hoarse. "Just tired." David walked past, engrossed in a phone call, his expression animated. Emily hurried by, giggling with a friend. The world was vibrant, alive, oblivious to the cosmic hiccup it had just endured. I walked out of the building, into the familiar bustling street. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried, street vendors shouted. The sun was still setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, just as it had been when the world froze. But now the colors felt richer. The air tasted sweeter, the sounds were clearer. Everything was infused with a new, profound significance. I looked at the faces around me, millions of individuals, each living their own intricate, fragile story. They were unaware of the precipice they had stood upon, unaware of the universal breath they had collectively held. I was the only one who remembered. I was the only witness. The knowledge was a heavy cloak, an invisible burden. I was still Michael, the same man who had walked into that office building this morning, but I was also fundamentally different. The connection to the gateway, the torrent of information, the overwhelming understanding of causality and time, it hadn't just changed my perception, it had changed me. I felt a subtle hum within me now, a low resonance that spoke of deeper layers of reality. I didn't know if I had gained any specific powers, or if I would ever see the gateway again. But I knew one thing. I understood the fragility of existence in a way no one else could. I had seen behind the curtain, witnessed the intricate machinery of the universe, and it had left an indelible mark. The world had unfrozen. Life had resumed its relentless, beautiful march. And I, Michael, was left to live in it, carrying the secret of its vulnerability, the knowledge of its near-death experience. A man forever changed, forever awake to the hidden pulse of the universe, living in a world that remembered nothing, for everyone but me. The ripple was still there, a faint echo, a reminder that the balance was delicate. And I, the anomaly, the glitch, was now perhaps its silent guardian. The world was alive, and I was alive within it, but I would never truly be the same. The mystery of the frozen world was solved, but a new, profound mystery had just begun. The mystery of what Michael, the man